what is progress if all the time we are less healthy, less happy, and there's breakdown all around, and we're still being forced to call that progress?
You were talking about those 5 R's.
Yeah.
Reconnect, rethink,
Yeah.
resistance, renewal, and rejoice.
We were driven away from the land and away from being dependent on one another.
Nate Hagen, he said that India still has the opportunity, openness, or porosity to actually produce locally.
Because they weren't being pressured by this globalized system that's become more and more and more toxic.
You don't go to school, where are your peers or you have any friends? And she was like 9 or 10 and she said that, yeah, I have friends. This rock is my friend. This tree is my friend. The calf is my friend.
Bringing now AI into creating a better world. Please don't buy into that, because we're being pressured now to believe that. This AI is a perfect tool for distant domination. If you want to be happier and healthier, and if you want to help make the whole planet happier and healthier, connect locally.
Welcome to the Bodhi Sangha Podcast, where we come together to listen, learn, and support each other in uncertain times. We're a community exploring how to face today's challenges with wisdom, trust, and care. Join us as we walk this journey of change, rooted in connection and guided by life's deeper wisdom.
Namaste. Welcome to yet another Bodhi Sangha podcast. And this time our guest is Helena Norberg-Hodge. I'm really happy to have you here, Helena. World knows about her, but some of our audience or people from our Sangha or from our co-travelers might not have the exposure. So I would take this opportunity to share a bit about her. She's founder and director of this organization called Local Futures. It's been 50 years now, I think 1975. You went to Ladakh and then now it's been 50 years. So it's a like 5 decades work. She's also convener of World Localization Day, and she started like this alliance of localization, the international alliance. She's written lots of books. One of my favorite, because I've read that one, which is Ancient Futures. I really liked it, and it inspired us. You've also made amazing film, The Economics of Happiness, and that also helped us whenever we would do any kind of perspective building. We would definitely like share this film with our people, and youth especially would get so inspired by that film. So it has helped us a lot, like personally and in our work a lot. And she's been I was reading about you, and there was this thing that you also learned Ladakhi language at that time, and that was really very inspiring. Like very few could do that. Even lots of Indians who go there and work, they don't know the language. So it was amazing. And how you went for a film, shooting a film, and then fell in love with that place, connected with that place, and understood and experienced the wisdom of that place. That's really commendable. So yeah, that is about Helena. Helena, how do you feel to be here in this space? And we can start from there. And maybe then we can touch upon your major work, which is around localization, and then maybe can go to other pieces.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be here, and I'm really glad that you found both Ancient Futures and the Economics of Happiness helpful. And, that you mentioned how I learned the language. And I sort of think if I hadn't learned to speak the language fluently, I wouldn't have had this insight into another world, really, a world where people hadn't been colonized. And you have to remember that in the West, we were colonized too at the same time as slavery was shaping a lot of the world. So were the enclosures in Europe. And so we were driven away from the land and away from being dependent on one another. to becoming dependent in urban centers we became dependent on a global system. And Agak really showed me from the inside how incredibly destructive it is when we can no longer have a closer connection with the water, the soil, the animals that we depend on, and on the people that we depended on traditionally. And we were dependent, the old and the young were completely connected. But we're now in this very pressured sort of machine that's driving us apart and that's continuing to destroy farmers and push people into urban centers. And it's really a machine, and we shouldn't keep blaming our governments or thinking it's about left or right, but really look at that bigger picture. So I got an amazing opportunity to see that bigger picture.
Yeah, thank you that you took that step and moved to Ladakh so that we could now have all this wisdom and experience. And when you were talking about this dependence, and even in localization, when you say that the dependence on the global corporation and how to move from there to interdependence, it's like I remember in my village, I come from a village, so I have I've experienced all the things. And whenever we would have like we would not have sugar, we would go to the neighbor and ask for sugar. And it still happens because we, I mean, Amazon has not reached there that we can, on our phone get something immediately. That interdependence is still there. But yes, I also acknowledge that market has reached, schools have reached, privatization have reached, globalization have reached, phones, internet, AI, everything has reached to the village, and it is actually breaking the fabric uh, immensely. So maybe we can start with this question, that in this kind of context or scenario, how do we now move from that dependence of global corporations to interdependence that we already had? We have been uprooted. And what are your experiences, what you have seen, what has changed, and now what we need to do to reclaim it?
What I see, which is very encouraging, is that there seems to be almost an intuitive, innate need to reconnect to nature and reconnect with community. And so all around the world, you can see small initiatives trying to rebuild deeper community, deeper sharing, where we're now moving away from a competitive consumer culture where we've been made to feel insecure and inferior. And I think even in your village when you were growing up, the mark of British colonialism had already made people feel that they're not quite good enough, had already disempowered them. And we don't realize how incredibly harmful that is. And that the way to regain it is to connect with other people and honestly share our feelings, share our fears, our problems. And when we do that, we suddenly realize nobody is perfect. Nobody is actually living up to this ridiculous role model, not in the West either, or in an Indian village. And so, in fact, when you understand also that people in the West often suffer more from this, in fact, the rates of insecurity, of depression, of this sort of fear of being yourself is more marked in the West than it is in your country. And so, uh, so much of this is about us being aware that innately, we have evidence that people innately want that connection, want to be able to be themselves, and that's always going to mean imperfect, and to still feel that they belong. And so what you see is these circles of men's groups, women's groups, father and children group, father and son, mother and daughter, all attempting to reweave a different fabric from what the dominant culture pushes. And now it's very often connected to nature experience. And so very often being out in nature and recovering our sense of spiritual connection to nature, our sense of joy, our sense of expansion, our sense of feeling at one and the same time small but very expanded as we feel part of nature. So the spiritual awakening that's very encouraging is this nature spirituality that's being brought in, probably more in the West than in India right now. But I think even in India, it's happening. And it's really, there's all kinds of evidence that when this happens, people feel happier. Now the evidence includes actually measuring using neuroscience, measuring what's happening to the vagus nerve, to the hormones. And so, there are now schools where the children are helped to learn to grow vegetables, to grow food, and they're actually measuring the well-being of those children and students when they're out on the land with their hand in the dirt and growing things together or looking after animals. And this, so what we need to do is to become more aware, partly also listen to our own hearts and our own guts and be more both introspective, but also more aware of the sort of news and the cultural shift that is happening. But we don't get to hear about it in the mainstream, in school, in universities, in the media. We have to look for the alternative websites, books, and so on.
My journey also started that way. Like, it was very difficult to, like, because we were deeply conditioned and we were not able to see the beauty in the village. So we would always think that the wisdom that we need is not coming from the village. So we would, and there were also not many people who would validate. So we would definitely see the wisdom coming from Gandhi or reading some other poetry or somewhere, and mostly it came from definitely from books. When you were talking about reconnection, I remember in one of your recent video, you were talking about those 5 R's.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, reconnect, rethink,
Yeah.
resistance, renewal, and rejoice. I think
Yes.
that was the really nice balance between the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. When do we need to really rethink, because how school system has crushed our spirit of inquiry very systemically, and now, like, because I can connect with it. My kids don't go to school, 3 of them, and I know that what they don't have to go through that I have to, because I've been schooled heavily. So my unlearning process is very difficult, and they don't have to go through that
Oh,
because they have not been conditioned. So I
yeah.
was really connecting with that. Maybe you can share it with our audience about those 5 R's and how you
Yes.
connect them with
Yeah.
important things. Also, in that, one important thing that I realized, that you were actually, how Charles Eisenstein talks about this story of separation. And when you were talking about reconnect, it actually talks about that causative part when we talk about the diagnosis of the problem of all meta crisis that we are going through. I think that the reconnect part, I could connect the most with self, with your people, and the nature, and
Yeah.
more than
Oh,
humans. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. Because really, when we understand what this system consists of, that, we think of as a global economy, there's also a global culture that's being imposed. And then, in fact, I like not to call it a culture because all cultures until this modern system really emanated from people's deep dialogue with nature and with each other. And so, all around the world, different cultures evolved and developed with different characteristics, different foods, different languages, and so much of it because of the adaptation to the diversity of nature. And then we get the rise from Europe of what becomes first, Christianity and trade expanding across the world and telling people they're inferior if they don't follow the same Christian religion. And then the traders start destroying the local economies, and that later becomes this global system. And that global system is imposing on our children, not just through schooling, but also through the media. And it's almost like it's in the air now, like even in the most remote villages, the idea that an urban consumer lifestyle is superior, and that having being close to nature, close, dirty hands, all of that is considered inferior. And so this pressure is very, very strong in school. School is like the perfect place because you're separating children into separate age groups. And so there is this unnatural monoculture. And they desperately want to be connected. They want to feel loved. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. But here you create this artificial environment, and then what's imposed is a monoculture, an artificial monoculture, or a mono system, where you learn nothing about the particulars of your environment. So homeschooling is a fundamental part of all of this, but it requires more than that, because now, as I say, it's coming through the atmosphere, through the
Yes.
mobile phone and the television. So what we realize is that wherever you are, really focusing on a deep reconnection is moving away from this path, which has always been separation from the land, separation from others, separation even from within yourself, the division between your mind, your heart, and your gut, the division in the brain, even overemphasizing the left side of the brain. So it's division, separation. But it comes from this system that we need to understand, that Charles also doesn't talk enough about. I think it's really helpful when we realize this didn't emanate from the bottom up. It emanated and started from elites who then imposed it. And to me, it's very important we understand that, because it makes it, I think, much more hopeful that we can move away from it. And we don't need to have an angry them and us. We just have to realize we've allowed ourselves to be trained into this system, and the sooner we can liberate ourselves from it. And it starts by liberating our minds and our heart. And doing that is absolutely best done as a group. So start not by thinking, what can I do, but what can we do? So even if you have just one or two mates, or at least a family that decides we're going to move in a different direction. So we start looking at a we and connecting deeply with others who really want to make this journey away from this prison. And then as we do that in a group beyond the family, comes that deeper dialogue, the deeper listening, being able to be vulnerable, imperfect, and simultaneously it's getting linked to that reconnection to nature. So that fundamental break that is so much deeper than we realize. And, the path of separation, we don't realize how separated we've been. And as we start reconnecting, as I said earlier, people feel a sense of well-being. And process of rethinking jointly in today's modern world where people are so busy. So I don't know, with your children, if you're homeschooling, are you doing that with other families or just on your own?
No, it's mostly it is the lifestyle. It's not just they are not going to school. So it has to be all things are integrated. If they don't connect with themselves first, then there is a problem. But they already have the connection. So it's they need the community. They need other people. They need sangha. That is very important, and also to have the exposure of different things, so that they can also decide what to learn, what not to learn. So it is very important in that way. And with us, we were living in Tapovan Swaraj space for almost 4 years. So they had that kind of exposure of nature and in their early years. And now also they have, like, because now they crave for it, and we live somewhere on the suburbs of the city, though Udaipur is very small, but still we keep on traveling to. So we spend 2 to 3 months in Auroville. We go to Uttarakhand, somewhere in the forest, for 2 to 3 months. So it's like 4 5 months we are staying in different places where they can connect with their peers, other unschoolers, other families. They can learn from some elders. And how you were talking about this monoculture, I remember once somebody asked one of her daughter that, you don't go to school, where are your peers, or you have any friends? And she was like 9 or 10, and she said that, yeah, I have friends. This rock is my friend. This tree is my friend. The calf is my friend. And I have some elders here, some other people, they might be in their 20s, but they are my friends. So it's like their friendships definition is totally different than what we have like kept on boxing the definition of yeah. So it's in that way they've been learning differently. There are definitely some struggles. i
Yeah.
I want to focus more
Well,
on you.
I guess learning from Ladakh, I slightly worry about the idea that the children themselves should decide what they need to learn. And I think the deeper friendships with humans is paramount as a child, more important than the friendship, with the animals and the rock. Although that's also very important, but it's the human connection that they need, and they need role models that they need to learn from. They need to learn from the elders.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes the unschooling or homeschooling world can make a mistake by giving them too much freedom and thinking that the wisdom comes from the children in a certain way. There is wisdom there, but actually not the wisdom of life, not the wisdom of really what comes with maturity. And so, yeah, I hope to. I mean, I actually want to write books about individual aspects of what I learned in Ladakh. This is not me speaking. I could never, as an individual, without, I'm just talking about what I saw working in Ladakh. And it became so obvious. It became so obvious that even the 7-year-old knew better than 3-year-old, of course. But, that also meant that the 12-year-old knew better than the 7-year-old, and that the 80-year-old knew better than all of us. But of course, they were very, very lucky because they were not living in a system where technology was transforming their way of life almost from day to day and speeding things up. And of course, with that unnatural speed, both children and elders get left behind. And I'm
Hmm.
an elder now who can barely figure out how to get onto Riverside to do this
Hmm.
podcast. The sort of technology has marginalized and
Hmm.
and turned sort of the world over to teenage boys, as I write in Ancient Future,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
why a big part of the rethinking that we encourage is understanding the link between the urbanizing education, where we learn nothing about the natural world that is our home and that is our economy. It's everywhere, our economy. But we were not allowed to learn about the natural world that could actually feed and sustain us. We instead were trained into, in the modern era, a few chemicals for agriculture and a few chemicals for medicine and some artificial breeding materials for engineering, and all of them standard, all of them produced by big corporations, and all the time creating dependence and debt and enslavement. So to come back to that, really understanding that and moving then as groups, ideally as communities, to start becoming more independent from the system, but interdependent with the human community and the natural community around us. That's what we try to teach. And most of the, particularly for Westerners, it's very important that they read about the evidence from more indigenous traditional cultures and that they understand better. Well, for all of us, we need to understand its
Yeah,
impact.
yeah.
We're very keen that we're all aware that we do need to be able to say no and to resist the expansion of this techno domination. And it's the technology today that is the most frightening trend. And it's one of the most frightening cases that people see science and technology almost like a religion, and they're not aware that they are religious about the idea that this science that's had been marching hand in hand with technology has been funded by the top-down interests. So it's directly linked to extracting wealth to the top and impoverishing the majority. So in terms of the rethinking, we need to recognize that and then ideally be able to resist, which, as you know, is not easy, and especially with children or teenagers, exactly how you navigate
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
For sure, I'm saying that vitally important is that you have a social group and support for
Mm,
whatever you're doing. Because if you just try to do it alone as just a nuclear
mm.
family, it's probably more harmful
Yes.
than beneficial. You need to have and and then again, practically, when we're dependent on the system economically, it's not so easy to get out of it. And I want also everyone to be clear and honest, but no blame, no idea. Okay, well, I'm just going to dump everything, go out and live in the forest. Well, you can't. We don't have the system set up. It's probably not even allowed. We won't even find a
Mm,
space where you could do that. So
yeah.
that's why we've got to be very kind to ourselves, kind to the dominating forces, the corporate heads, the governments, because they've been trained into this as the only way forward. And they're
Mm,
often acting out of fear.
yes.
As a CEO who's got to bring in the money if he wants to keep his job. Otherwise, the shareholders will kick him out, or in governments where you're trained to believe this is the only path. So it's up to us to realize, well, no, actually, there is another path, not just one, but
Mm,
literally multitude that have to do with respecting diversity, the land, the local, the human scale, learning about the technologies that existed that were more in the control of people and that allowed us to actually live a life where we worked far less than in the modern era, far, far less, you know.
mm,
And so there is definitely a possibility that if we wake up enough and if enough people start supporting this, then we'll be resisting the continuation. That would mean articulating also that all governments virtually have been subsidizing global corporations or the giants that might even be in their own country,
mm.
subsidizing them who generally don't pay tax, and they've been deregulating these giants.
It's a total puzzle that those who don't know or those who don't need it, they are getting. Those who really need it, they are not
Yeah,
getting.
yeah, but again, those who really need it is really mankind, humanity, if we want to survive. And so we're on a very stupid blind path. And very often the people at the top are going to be the most resistant to changing, partly because they're so pressured. I noticed already a long time ago when I would get to talk to a minister or maybe a prime minister, I would have a sound biting moment. Or if I ever got on television again, just sound bites. Whereas on the radio already, I could have a little more time. And in public lectures where I was talking to people, a little bit more. But then I also noticed how the time has sped up. So even for a public lecture now, people have less time. And it is probably one of the most scary things that's happening is that this dominant techno system is robbing us of time. We're running faster and faster and faster. So in our daily lives, we should try to cultivate a little space where we can slow down a little bit. But we can't expect that we're going to live a slow, local life as individuals. We can do our best, and we can do a lot at the local community level to start building some of those structures. Um, but I'm also hoping we can raise awareness so that even if it's just in the local area, that there'll be many more people joining this, many more, because then as a group, we can start supporting each other in meaningful ways. And that's the renewal, the resistance to the dominant part, but the renewal part. We have a whole action book on, taking action locally. It's free on our website. It gives examples. And there are examples like in some places, like in parts of Canada, people have managed to change regulations so that they can actually invest in local businesses, even their pension funds. And so there are existing models, but in order to make it happen, we need to build up the numbers. And then I maybe just mention also, because, I talked about reconnect, rethink, resist, renew, and rejoice. And today, every day, as the AI cloud looms larger, as we're made more and more fearful in terms of these numbers around climate change, and as depression, even suicide, and worse, divisiveness and violent conflict and war are on the increase, and then a shift to fascism. So every day, it's vital that we also carve out that time to calm the mind, take breathing. I understand that breathing is one of the most important paths to happiness, and rejoice in how much is still alive and how much is still working, and a miracle. Every aspect of life is a miracle. Every piece of wood is alive, has an amazing individual cellular structure. And in the growing tree, changing as we speak, every cell in our body, everything that lives is a miracle. And we can treasure that, we can celebrate that. And unfortunately, we can't afford to just go there, because in the, as it were, real practical world, what are we going to live on? How are we going to have a roof over our head? How are we going to feed us? We come back into the reality of being rather squeezed. So, but that dance between moving into the reality that we were born into, and that we were, and that I saw in Ladakh, shaped the daily lives, that's deep connections, along with a reminder that everything is interconnected, and that when we recognize that inextricable interconnectedness or interdependence of all things, of all phenomena, we will have peace of mind and be happier. So this is a message that people carried with them, along with a life where they felt that interdependence. So that's what I think we can all move towards. And I'm hoping that, before I die, that I'll see more of a discussion of this and more of an awakening to this choice between the path of disconnection and the path of reconnection.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, very nicely articulated and well put together, the whole 5 hours. And it actually talks about where do we need to start and where do we need to reach, because reconnection is the foundation work. And then if we'll still be nihilistic because everything is very difficult around us and the collapse is gradually happening, and if we won't be able to rejoice, or if we are still very serious about the solution, and if we don't have the playfulness, then I don't think we will be able to reach there together. So definitely rejoicing and playfulness is important. And the one thing that you were talking about around rethink is also very important, to actually question the paradigms that has been pushed into us, and they are not real. The objective truth is something else, and what we have been told is not a truth. It's an illusion. So how to come out of that? So it's really interesting and inspiring. I would shift the gear from here and would go back to localization, because I had a couple of things that I wanted to ask you, because it's one of the main umbrella under which lots of things that you have been doing. One is that around economy, Gandhi also shared a lot local economies, and Kumarappa talked about it a lot. Dharampalji also talked about it a lot. And in your work also, it is very interesting that you talk about strengthening the local regional economies. And in Indian context, like once we were talking to Nate, and Nate said that Nate Hagen, he said that India still has the opportunity, openness, or porosity to actually produce locally and minimize the gap between the producer and the consumer. So when we, and anyway, the global supply chain is crumbling, the geopolitical aspects and the war and everything, we will never know. It's very fragile. So he was suggesting that maybe India has that, and how to build that capacity, not just in one region, but overall pan India. So what is your like experience and suggestion in that area?
Well, I absolutely think India has a much greater chance of starting on a much larger scale to move in this direction. In other words, small scale on a large scale, the reconnection, particularly around basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, but also in all important areas of real education, of healthcare, um, and this sort of shift in worldview away from, as you were saying, these false assumptions which are not real. The propaganda around progress is just a sort of word. What is progress if all the time we are less healthy, less happy, and there's breakdown all around, and we're still being forced to call that progress? So I think the opportunities are definitely greater. What I see as the bigger problem is that this dominant propaganda about being in an urban consumer culture, and the propaganda that somehow in the West life is better and easier. I see this as still being a huge handicap. I mean, it's a handicap in the West as well, but not quite. In the West, people are more really, they come to the end station. New York is supposed to be like the pinnacle of this life, and still held up even in places like Sweden, the something more modern and more desirable in the mainstream. So that this propaganda about, which is all completely artificial. So I would say working on that in India and everywhere is again one of the most important things we can do. Bringing the reality, the facts of the amount of poverty, real poverty, the gap between rich and poor, the isolation, the loneliness, old people dying in apartments, and people may not be discovered sometimes for a month or more. People are so isolated. So all of this demystification, or if you like, reality, and these organized reality tours, I think that's still needed. Reality tours for people from Ladakh, Bhutan, Nepal, and so on, to actually come to the West, and not only to see with their own eyes that this supposed paradise is not a paradise at all, but to meet with people in the West who are working really hard to try to get back to the land, who love having dirty fingernails, so that having dirty fingernails becomes a source of pride And they're actually showing that on their WhatsApp and not WhatsApp, Instagram stories and so on, proud of farming and often, going to a lot of trouble, giving up well-paid jobs and then struggling to survive as a farmer, which is everywhere in the world not easy. But me actually experience the commitment of people who have supposed been at the very top. So that I think is a very important part of helping to make this shift where people would actively want to reestablish the deeper relationship with nature, not just about, oh, beautiful nature, but actually not condemning or, in fact, valuing hands in the soil, working with the animals, which also in Ladakh came very quickly seen as the worst thing possible. Tending to the animals, taking them to the pastures, and so on, came to be seen as the most primitive, terrible work. So I think that is happening. And in other words, this change in thinking is so paramount. But it benefits so much from connection between the people in India, all over India, as well as all over America and in Sweden. Once you start looking closer to the ground, you'll find many people in one way or another trying to do the unlearning and escaping the prison of this mindset, away from consumerism, away from the consumer culture is, again, this separation story of showing off and, not being able to be imperfect, not being able to be honest about our real problems, etc. So all over the world, you will find that there are kernels of groups, of initiatives, projects that are very inspiring. And you'll see land that was barren after a few years, sometimes 2, 3 years, it can be flourishing. And when these are initiatives that are community based, people collaborating together, they are so inspirational, so joyous. And so the key is both being more informed about the reality of this artificial myth of progress, West is best, urban is better, city is better than country. And it's then not about assuming that we can all go back to the land. Because from the city, many initiatives have been taken. One of the biggest that I know is in Seoul, South Korea, where it became 20,000 people collaborating together in the part of the city that collaborated first as a small group to prevent a development on their last forested hill. And out of that grew a commitment to try to add more community, more agency, more respect for nature, setting up an alternative school, setting up cooperative efforts, having a community hall, community meetings, community planning. It's a rare example of that, but certainly there are many, many examples of the benefits of people coming together. The co-housing movement in Denmark, the eco-village movement, in the whole permaculture movement, you see examples. In the transition town movement, you see examples. Now, people are talking about bioregionalism, but that's another part of localization. It's just that bioregionalism can sound a bit intellectualized for people, whereas talking about protecting their local forest or supporting their local farmers or their local businesses, I think more people can rally around that. But then we have another hook that comes from above that tells people, oh, that's selfish. You shouldn't just be concerned about the local. You need to feel love for the entire universe, for everybody. And the interesting thing is that if we do feel love for the whole universe, we need to localize because as we are part of the global system, we are using far more energy, far more resources than we
Yeah.
really had the right to. So we are robbing other people. So the
I would say it that way, that what would it look like to localize power and economy while globalizing compassion, wisdom, or mutual aid?
yeah,
Like not global supply chain, but global care network. Like we don't need global supply chain, but care network, but economies and the power should be localized so that it's both. And there is a paradox, but definitely we have to contextualize. So the critics are always like they decontextualize and then critic, but they
yeah,
don't see this layer.
yeah. And I would say global collaboration and, both cultural exchange and collaboration. And also remember that if we do care enough so that we really do create these thriving local economies, then we're reducing the kind of unhappiness that may contribute to violent conflict, to war, to demonizing others. When people actually feel secure, they are far more tolerant and far more
Totally, yeah.
not just accepting of difference, but
Mm,
embracing different. Because
mhm.
remember, the localizing part starts with embracing the fact that we are all imperfect. So as we feel embraced exactly the way we are, we then try and become more tolerant of others. So I think, and I'm sure you might still see this in India. We lived in Spain in the 80s, and even in Spain, having suffered Mongol invasions, the Inquisition, women often, dressed in black, and from the outside, the men seeming quite macho. I still discovered that this community fabric, intergenerational connection, and connection to the land was so much stronger than in the more urban industrial parts of the world where I had lived. And I saw that people still sang together, they made music together, and as I said, had that deeper connection to the animals, to the plants, and actually providing from the natural area around them. And I saw there what I experienced in Ladakh, which was very surprising to me, because in the sort of typical modern industrial scene now, particularly in America, you couldn't do this. But they would actually say things like, oh, well, you're limping, so you can't be running with us. Or you're blind, so you can't even see what we're talking about now. They wouldn't in any way try to pretend, oh, you're exactly the way we are. They would verbally acknowledge you're different and in some way handicapped often, but completely lovingly and in an inclusive way. And I've discovered that we're now at the point in a place like America where it would be absolutely terrible to say, oh, when your skin color is darker than mine, can't say that. And it's an inverse snobbery. It's basically saying, I have to pretend that you're exactly the same as me, and then I can love and respect you. So the deep embracing of diversity, the deep embracing of, as it were, yeah, fallibility and imperfection. Everything in nature is imperfect. There are no absolute straight lines. It's constantly changing, chaotic, interdependent, and it's this illusion of static permanence and perfection. The typical plastic compared to leather or plastic compared to wood, the standard deadliness of this modern material. And that's what's happening to human beings, becoming plastic, smiling, I'm perfectly happy. I have perfect teeth, I have perfect everything, and a nice
Yeah.
car. Yeah. So,
Sometimes it is disgusting to just witness that kind of pretense, which is also eating them alive inside. But they keep on doing that. Um, like you have touched upon so many threads,
yeah.
and and I feel like this conversation can keep on going because I have so many questions from different points. But one thing that I'm interested, which is also connected with the localization, and you talked about it, is around routing, like place-based institutions. And there I see different kind of things, and I would move towards some paradoxes, which is like hyper individualism and glorifying the collectives and not seeing the shadows of both the things. Another is like from urban space, I would go buy a land somewhere near the village and then would start doing all the sustainable things. But how you said, in a very hyper individualistic way. I don't have any relationship with the village. So in that way, routing again is some sort of, yes, you morally feel that you have done what you needed to do, but it is not localization. It is not place based institution, because you are excluding people more than including, because village is not part of your thing in that way. I've also experienced amazing things in Transylvania, Romania. There is this place called Fagarash, and we've been to different villages. And what we've experienced is that these people are doing things that actually include villagers. So it's maybe they might not be seeing things so systemically, but one thing that they have cracked is including villagers in small experiments. So it is not just a cute small land based experiment, but it is like more holistic in that way. So maybe you can share more around this routing part, because if we don't have place based institution, then localization might be intellectualized, fuzzy, fluffy thing. But if you have a routing, like how in Ladakh, or maybe if I talk about my village, if I go and stay there and connect with the villagers and then create something rather than having my land somewhere exclusively. So how do you see that?
I'm a little bit worried about almost anyone who's trying to do things in a, as it were, better way, in a more equitable way, in a more ecological way, um, being pressured to be perfect when we're operating in this system that is so destructive. And I would say that even if you from the city were to connect with a few farmers and start creating an interdependence between an urban group and a group of farmers, you're already creating something that is so much better than what is happening through the pressures of both government and big business, encouraging farming in monoculture for a more distant or centralized market. It could still be even within India, but it's still, monoculture for export, not no direct relationship between the farm and the consumer. Once you start establishing a more direct relationship, you've already done something that's very positive. And so you help to reduce the pollution, the mountains of plastic, and you can be creating a type of community and support between the urban dweller and the farmers. And what happens in that is that the farmer almost inevitably will be better paid than in the dominant system, where large monoculture, so that the apples also need to be as standard of size as possible, because it's linked to the subsidies for generations for bigger and bigger machinery, encouraging standardized monocultural. And because it's monocultural, it's inevitably chemical intensive. Even when it's organic, it becomes extremely difficult to produce in monoculture. And that's why the shorter distances are so important. So, a way, when you talked about instead, you maybe as someone living in Bombay, moving out into the village and trying to start a project there, in some ways, probably, I don't know if I want to generalize, but certainly these relationships that are being built between the city dwellers and the rural people are a very important part of localization. To the extent that you might go out yourself and live there and try to embed yourself in the village, yeah, even there, I think you could start something that could be good, without being all inclusive. So it's tricky because when there is pressure that everything should be a co-op, for instance, I don't agree with that. What I recognize in Ladakh and in Spain, especially in these, if you like, more traditional setting, was that very often the the family owned, the family owned farm, the family owned shop. I mean, when we first moved to Spain in the early 80s, they didn't even have shops. You just knew that Maria and her family had cows and that you could buy something. You could buy either milk or meat from them, or that someone else had quite a lot of olive trees and you could buy olive oil and olives from them. And so the the idea that private or independently owned is bad is not the issue, it's scale. It's scale. So family owned businesses in so many parts of the world for generations managed to produce food for the community, pottery to be used, perhaps wooden furniture, perhaps clothing, perhaps shoes, perhaps they were good at building. And they didn't grow and grow and grow and sell out to a chain. Why? Because they weren't being pressured by this globalized system that's become more and more and more toxic. And so, so even if you were to go to the village and you start a small business that's producing something in an ethical, ecological way that provides for needs, even in the city, and without the ambition, this is the problem. It's really hard because where it's very problematic is that many people have done that, like they've started a company to do yogurt that was, organic and it's run from a proper farm. And they do well because that's what the consumer wants. And then they get bigger. And then pretty soon they're a multinational or they sell out to a multinational. And so if the commitment could be to smaller scale, and I just want to say again, smaller scale is a central part of it. It's more important than if it's a cooperative and totally inclusive um, or a private business. The scale is the more important thing.
Yeah, very interesting. Makes total sense. Since we have less time,
Yeah.
I want to, also talk about the movement because it's been 50 years. You're still standing, and not just standing, still inspiring, doing things. Uh, I actually want to talk about more around transmission because what we have been struggling and seeing that more like the people get influenced, uh, but that influence isn't the same as transmission. They get influenced, but then they forget to. Uh, so it's very important that the content, maybe content transfer is faster, and it it might create something, but what is slower and which creates different results, maybe we are not experiencing that. And in your experience, or maybe I would use the indigenous cultures of my village. We have I come from a tribal area, and there are lots of beels around. And I've at that time I didn't really realize their wisdom, but now when I see back, I really see that what they were doing. And I mean, now it's difficult to see those things, but back then they were there. And in that I saw that the knowledge and culture and everything was held in a lineage, passed through apprenticeship and embodied relationship rather than content or workshops. Or and in our movements, what's happening right now, that nobody wants to spend time in person. They want to go for a call or a workshop, and then they get influenced and leave. What gets lost, that I feel is an important question. And what can be transmitted, what can't be transmitted through media, like something that cannot be transmitted through media. We need to come together And what is your experience in this movement building and your 40 years of experience in movement building?
Well, I so agree with you, and that's why, in a way, the movement I'm building is based on personal connections.
Yes.
And I've been urged by so many people to create a platform and to build up a network just based on no personal contact. And yet I just yeah. So what our movement that's been building up has been relatively small and slow. It has actually been based primarily on people that I've had personal contact with, or people that those people have had personal contact with. So we had a conference in Ladakh recently, and it was very striking how it really was people who, either we had contact with personally, or those people had had contact with, or those people that had contact with. So it's sort of spreading out through a chain of personal connection. And and also everything I say online is about urging people to connect locally where they are. And so I'm talking about, them becoming the center of the activity and their connection to nature and to others. So that also by encouraging that online, I'm hoping that we're in fact we are sometimes, people do then follow that advice and do that path of connection and, both the reconnection and the rethinking. So it's growing, but slowly. And I'm just hoping that there will be more people saying what I'm saying. And there are, I feel there are. But one of the things that does, I believe, um, unfortunately, preoccupied too many of them is the belief that through technology they can actually strengthen the movement or really create the movement. I think through technology now, even AI, we could use it to get out this clear message. If you want to be happier and healthier, and if you want to help make the whole planet happier and healthier, connect locally, connect with life around you. That means with the other people around you. And the connection is also going to be best if you don't connect in a age monoculture, or ideally even in a group monoculture, you know, but connect. And also don't try to be too perfect. So don't feel that, oh, unless we have every representative of the city of Mumbai or something, the poorest and the richest and no, just create a human scale group. And then from that, grow into something that is more secure, that's more compassionate, more willing, and more clearly resisting the dominant fear based. Because, by the way, the path of division at every level is based on fear. It's based on fear of nature. And by the way, that the fear of nature is very close to the fear of women, the fear of women and the feminine. And so I was very unhappy that feminism, for so much of its time, was about proving that women are just like men. No, I'm trying to say both men and women need to reclaim their feminine. Their gentler, their more cooperative side. And so, yeah. So I think we can use the systems of communication to encourage this life-based path. And so anyone who's listening, hopefully, will think about how they could connect locally, and the learning, that they can gain from us and our material is examples of how to do that and examples of people who are doing that. And then there's a lot of value through collaboration, as we were saying, and care, where we exchange with each other, but rooted in the real, rooted in that fabric of connection locally.
So use media as tool to share this message that please come together, meet in person, have lots of fun, and then co-sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also like to say that for some people, I guess it's confusing that like so many people, particularly men, who've always wanted, in order to connect farmers and consumers, basically, they wanted to set up a platform, an internet platform. They wanted people to be able to order in that way and generally some of those systems lasted for a bit and grew a bit, but what I've seen be really inspirational has been the authentic, more deeply connected, where there was some face-to-face relationship, not with everyone, but and it means also slightly slower,
Yes, it is
speeding
slower.
everything up, and so bringing now AI into creating a better world. Please don't buy into that because we're being pressured now to believe that because AI is a perfect tool for distant domination, distant, billionaires and companies that own our lives, our worldview, our science, having even more concentrated and centralized power. It's a perfect tool. But the tool for engaging with real hearts and minds and caring people, part of it is going to be slowing down. The minute we're engaging face to face, we don't want to be operating at the speed of the technology. And in a million other ways, we cannot respect diversity through those technicals. We end up just like they're doing now, the banks and the government institution. We can't possibly deal with our individual specific situation. We become a number and they become brutal masters without even knowing it because they never see us. They only see us as numbers. So, yeah, seeing the world as it is, not as a number or representation of it, is one of the first steps to compassion, care, and respect.
I would sum up this as how to rethink our relationship with scale, speed, and some sort of needs that we have, which might be coming through the need of convenience, and that
Yeah.
convenience takes us to consume more and be in ease.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that way I'm I am trying to conclude this, though there are so many threads that are loose, and I would say that we should definitely talk again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But any last words that you would want to share with our audience? Maybe not just strategical, but about how to sustain themselves and their relationships over decades, like how you did or you have been doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly for me, I did have this joy in nature, even when I was younger. I grew up in Sweden, which is a very sort of nature loving culture. And so that's always been when I would feel depressed or alone or something, being out in nature was very, very helpful. That's still something that sustains me. But then what Ladakh did was to completely convince me that every child that's born wants to be loved, wants to feel connected, and that inherently the human condition is a preference for loving collaborative relationships. We don't have a preference for convenience and speed. No, that's been pushed on us. And this is where I differ from a lot of people who haven't experienced a culture that was free of the transformation through colonialism and so on. So they were independent still, and they were able to be interdependent in their own world with others out there. And I saw them as the happiest, most vibrant people I had ever met. And then I saw how the system imposed on them created the unhappiness, the self doubt, and led to divisiveness and artificial scarcity of job. So I think I urge people to just listen to what I'm saying is, do you not agree that every child that's born wants and needs love? And don't you believe that if they get that they will be more loving people? They will be more caring. And so we're not born. The idea that we all want to keep growing, that we created this system, no. No one ever wants to go from 6 foot to 7 foot to 8 foot tall. It's not inherent in the human condition. What is deeply inherent is that need for love and connection. And that requires a deeper relationship at a slower pace, a human scale. And that doesn't mean we can't have technology, but we want to be very, very aware that these techno systems are robbing us of time. And that means robbing us of our humanity. So, anything we can do, again, as I said, to give time to rejoice, to celebrate the living world. And by the way, singing and dancing together as intergenerational communities, to my knowledge, virtually every traditional culture did that. And in the modern sector, people listen, oh, no, I can't sing, I'm not good enough. I grew up like that. I only started singing when I was 60. And singing together, chanting together is so joyful. So be sure to carve space in your busy calendar to give yourself joy and the people around you as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Yes, we all would do that, and thank you for also like validating that relational field is very important to respond to this meta
Yeah.
crisis that we are
Yeah.
going through.
Yeah.
And definitely playfulness, singing, dancing, and we should definitely do that. Should have
Yeah.
joy in whatever we are doing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Helena.